So the fourth chapter of Gittin is really focused on tikkun olam. What is tikkun olam? Well, we need to figure it out from context. It's not really how it's described today. It's really a tikkun is a fix, and in the case this is we're going to look at, this is really a fix which the rabbis make when they know they've screwed up. So when the rabbis make a mistake, they can make a fix, or when the halacha makes a mistake. And we are going to zigzag in and around topics of get. So we haven't left get entirely, but we are zigzagging around. And we've already said that the topic of get, dissolving a marriage, is analogous in some way to freeing a slave. Really interesting parallel, and maybe one that feels a bit uncomfortable today, but there's a legal change in the status of the wife and of the slave. And so the Mishnah is going to be zigzagging around slavery. And that's where we find ourselves in the fourth Mishnah. Evet shenishba ufuda'uhu. So a slave is taken captive, and then he's been ransomed. So someone has come along and ransomed him. He's probably been taken captive in war. This is a Canaanite slave, by the way. I mean, if he was a Jewish slave, we'd just pull all the stops out to get him back. This is a Canaanite slave. So he's taken captive, and then he's been ransomed by a third party. Well, we're going to have a question as to what's his ownership status? Does he go back to the first master? And the Mishnah rules. L'shem Eved, if he was ransomed as a slave, Yishtabed, he goes back to being a slave. But he's going to go back to being a slave to his new master, by the way, not to the old one. L'shem ben chorin, if he's ransomed as a free person, lo yishtabed, he doesn't get slave. If he's ransomed as a free man, he doesn't go back to slavery. And Rabban Gamliel he's going to make a tikkun. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Sorry, this is not Rabban Gamliel. This is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. This is the next generation down. He's going to make a tikkun. Bein kach ukach yishtabed. In either case, he goes back to slavery. And the Gemara makes clear that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is talking about going back to slavery to his original master. And there seems to be a concern that in a war situation, slaves are going to run around and give themselves up to marauding soldiers in order to get emancipated from their masters. And we don't want to do that. Really interesting commentary, right, in terms of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's view of social order. So we're not going to do that. And he rules in either case, this slave has to go back to his original master. What if he is mortgaged? What if this slave is mortgaged? Eved, she'asa'o rabo apoteki l'achrim. So a person makes his slave a pledge for a debt. The word in the Mishnah is apotiki. And that seems to be a Greek word, but we still see it, by the way. If you look at German mortgage-backed bonds, like Fannie Mae bonds in the US, if you look at German mortgage-backed bonds, they're still called something like Apothekenpfandbrief. So this word apoteki still comes up to mean mortgage, at least in German, in modern financial parlance. So let's go back to the Mishnah. Eved she'asa or rabo apotiki. So his master made him a pledge. So la'acherim. So his master's borrowed, maybe he's borrowed $100, and he said, okay, I don't want to give you my cloak or my house as a mortgage. I'm going to give you my slave as a mortgage. You can have a pledge over my slave. And then what does he do? Veshichro. And then he frees him. Because of course, the master can still free his slave when he's pledged out as a mortgage. It's actually, you could say it's a movable asset. Something he can't do to land. So hang on, the lender's going to be really upset here because the lender thought he had a pledge, And the pledge, of course, now has a perfect legal right to walk out of the door as a free man. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Okay, what are we going to do? Shurat hadin, ein ha'eved chayav klum. In terms of the letter of the law, the slave is not liable to do anything. In other words, there's no, according to the letter of the law, it's between the lender and the borrower. The slave can just walk out of the door. He's scot-free, absolutely free. Ela, but mipnei tikkun olam, because of tikkun olam, kofin et rabo ve'oseh oto ben chorin. Because of tikkun olam, we actually force his master. And we're now talking about the second master, the lender who's enjoying this slave who's pledged to him. We force the second master to emancipate him, i.e. to give him a bill of release. Because we don't want a situation where someone is, I don't know, walking around the marketplace and this second master, says, oh, no, you're mine, you were pledged to me. In other words, because of tikkun olam, we're going to make the status of this slave completely transparent, and he's going to receive a release document from both individuals, from both masters. Ve'chotev shtar al damav. And the slave is going to just write a document attesting to his value so that at least the lender and the borrower can sort out the financial issues. Maybe put up obviously the borrower might have to put up more collateral to the value of the slave. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. So we're back with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Eino kotev ela mishachrer. Rabban Gamliel says, the slave has no responsibilities here. It's not the slave that writes out the document about its value. It's the person that freed him. The person that freed him essentially did the damage to the collateral. He has to write out the value. So that's the first example of kind of tikkun olam, sort of, and actually our first insight into social norms in the time of the Mishnah. But let's carry on with a different social norm, but still bringing in slavery and still bringing in tikkun olam. Mi shechetzio eved vechetzio ben chorin. Someone who's half a slave and half free. Well, how could someone be half slave and half free? Well, what if, for example, you were a slave that was owned by two different individuals, and one of them freed you? So in that situation, you could wind up as half free and half slave. And that situation it's quite complicated. I mean, for example, are you obligated in mitzvah? Is the half of you that's free obligated in mitzvah? You could imagine we could have quite a lot of discussions about the status of this individual who's half free, half slave. But let's just see how it plays out. We're in Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. We're in early Mishnah times. So, Oved et rabo yom echad ve'et atzmo yom echad kedivrei Beit Hillel. So Beit Hillel says he works one day for himself and one day for his master. So in other words, he gives his master one day and two. He gives him basically 3 days work per week because he's half a slave. That's Beit Hillel. And you can think Beit Hillel is a sort of rational, it's a rational solution to the problem. Interestingly, it's not the one we're going to take, and Beit Shammai have a radically different approach. Let's look at Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai omrim. Beit Shammai say, Tikantem et rabo vet atzmo lo tikantem. You sorted out his master. Tikantem et rabo. You sorted out his master because you gave his master 3 days. 3 days work. Vet atzmo lo tikantem. But you didn't sort out this poor individual who's half a slave and half free. What's he going to do? Lisa shifra no yachol. He can't marry a slave girl because he's half free. But chorene no yachol. He can't marry a free woman because he's half slave. Yibatel, shall he refrain? That means, shall he refrain from having children? In other words, and what is his really, really interesting sort of insight from the Mishnah into what we would in Europe call the human right to family life. What's the right of this guy to family life if he's half a slave and half a free man? והלא נברא העולם אלא לפרייה ורבייה. And the whole world, wasn't the whole world only made for being fruitful and multiplying? And I'm going to bring a quote now from Yeshayahu. Lo tohu v'ra'ah lashevet yitzara. He didn't make it as a waste. He made it to be inhabited. The world is made to be inhabited. We can't stop people from propagating. We can't cut off their right to family life. So Beit Shammai will have a different solution. Eila, mipnei tikkun olam, because of tikkun olam, kofin et rabo ve'oseh oto ven chorim. We compel his master to emancipate him. We make his master emancipate him. And he writes a document for half his purchase price. And Beit Shammai win. Ve'chotev shtar al chatzi damav chazru Beit Hillel lehodot kedivrei Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel retracted their opinion. They reversed their opinion, and they started to teach like Beit Shammai. So for the sake of tikkun olam, once someone is half a free man, we actually make him completely a free man. And this is a Canaanite slave, by the way, not a Jewish slave. He's a Canaanite slave. He has no rights. But once he's half a free person, we force the owner of the other half to make him fully free.